So I know pretty much nothing
All right.
about ham radio.
Yeah.
And so I have like so many questions
All right.
about it. So first of all, like tell us about how you got into ham radio.
That is an interesting one.
And I guess maybe we should actually back up and like brief overview of what ham radio is. Yeah.
So amateur radio. So ham is it's not a derogatory term, but it is an unofficial term. The proper term.
Oh.
If we're going to be proper, I can stick your pinky out.
Oh, hang on.
Hang on.
I'll drink my tea because
Proper.
I'm, double fisting with tea and beer because that's how you do it.
It's uppers and downers. Amateur radio is a way for non-commercial entities, individuals, people like me, to be able to experiment with radio. And there are a bajillion and a half different things you can do in ham radio. So when people say, what do you do with ham radio? One of our favorite phrases is that it is a hobby of 1,000 hobbies, because there are so many different things that you can do with it. Anything from like short range, and by short range, I mean miles to tens of miles to hundreds of miles in the absolute best case, like short range handheld, like if you think of an FRS radio, like you see kids running around the neighborhood with, like that, but on steroids, to kind of the longer range communications. That would be the shorter range stuff would be VHF or UHF for my ham listeners here, to the longer range stuff, which is the lower frequencies, ironically called high frequency HF, as opposed to like very high frequency or super high frequency.
High.
Yeah, exactly. So the HF range are longer wavelengths and bigger antennas, lower frequencies, and they are the kinds of waves that can bounce around the world, literally. Yeah. So it goes up.
It can like bounce off the atmosphere and then like
and come back down again thousands of miles away.
Yeah, which is super cool because then you like actually can talk to people who are outside of line of sight of the antennas, which is like what?
Yeah. So the VHF, UHF stuff is mostly line of sight. There's asterisks there because there are asterisks on all of this. There are exceptions to everything I'm about to tell you. But for the most part, the VHF, UHF stuff is short range, line of sight. Typically, we'll use what's called a repeater. It's a radio that you stick on a mountaintop or on top of a building that receives a signal and then rebroadcasts it. So the obligatory drawing is, think of a mountain and you got a person over here with a radio and a person over here with a radio. They can't talk directly to each other, but they can both talk to the top of the mountain. Right. Yep. And so repeaters are useful in VHF and UHF like that. HF is the direct person to person stuff. That's the long range stuff. I do all of it, both of those. Some people only do one, some people only do the other. And then these are just the two kind of entry simple to explain things. There are a bajillion other things you can do with ham radio. I typically view ham radio. Oh, let me go back to what is ham radio. So it is a kind of an internationally defined thing. The rules are not exactly the same in all the different countries, but most countries have something that is called amateur radio with the intention of being able to talk to other amateurs either in the same country and or other countries as well. The whole point of amateur radio, the reason the governments still do it is because I'm going to get this wrong, and I'm sure people are going to correct me, but the idea
the internet's good at.
Yeah, everyone watch the chat. We are supposed to be experimenting. Like in the early days of radio, in the early and mid 20th century, a lot of the new advancements in radio technology came out of amateurs just playing around with stuff. Single sideband and even AM and all that kind of stuff came out of amateurs experimenting with it. And even now, a lot of new technology comes out of the amateur radio community. CDMA, like some of the early cell phone technology, wasn't actually experimented with in amateur radio, but an amateur radio operator is the one who developed it and used his knowledge from amateur radio to develop that. And I can't remember the guy's name, but he's the guy who started Qualcomm. He's a very active ham. Yeah.
Oh, that's cool though.
Fun story. He's also the guy who wrote Procom. If any of you from the old BBS days in the 80s and 90s, Procom was a DOS terminal emulator. Same guy. Anyway, so experimentation, come up with new technologies. We're also very good in emergencies because none of the stuff that we do requires any infrastructure, right? It doesn't require a telephone line. It doesn't require, again, asterisk. We're getting into things that does make use of that sort of stuff, but the basis of the technology doesn't require any infrastructure. And so when the shit hits the fan, I can swear on this live stream. I can't swear on my other ones, but she told me it was okay.
It is okay.
So when the shit hits the fan and, your cell networks are down or the internet's down or you don't have power or whatever, amateur radio operators are there and they can communicate.
Yeah.
And so we'll get called out, like earthquakes, I'm in California. We're all in California. We're in California here. So earthquakes are our natural disaster du jour.
Fires now too.
And fires, yeah. But like Red Cross will call us out and have us do communications for them and stuff like that.
Yeah, it's super interesting. Like, so, growing up in the USVI, radio played...
Virgin Islands.
Yes, U.S. Virgin Islands territory. It is part of the United States. It's really interesting because the radio played a much bigger role in even just like in kind of person-to-person communications and community communications, I would say, than it necessarily does here. And I mean, even the FM stations, right? Like when there was a hurricane, everybody would be broadcasting for like as long as they could, kind of thing. Just like updates, people would call into the radio station if they still had telephone to like report on what was going on different islands, on different parts of the island. And like, it's really weird to me that like the radio here does not, there's never anything about, like if there's a local fire, there's just not even anything on the local radio stations about that. And I probably have to go to FM and or AM, and there's probably like some AM band that's like the emergency one that I don't know about. But it's odd for me that it seems like here radio is just not used in that way. Broadcast radio.
Our broadcast radio in this area especially doesn't have a lot of local ownership. It's produced locally, but it's all owned by Clear Channel and whatever else. And so the programming is done elsewhere. There are a few exceptions to that. KVEC, I can't remember whether KVEC is local still or not. But
anyway, so ham radio, useful in emergencies and also useful for innovation.